Every family has a sacred ritual, a moment when the world outside fades and only love remains. For the Ortega family, that moment was Christmas Eve. But on December 24th, 2008, in the quiet suburb of Covina, California, someone wearing the costume of joy itself walked through their door and turned their celebration into a massacre. 9 people perished that night, not by accident, not by chance, but by the hand of someone they once called family. This is a true story. This is the Midnight File. Before we begin tonight's investigation, I need to ask something of you. We're working toward a milestone, 100 subscribers who believe that forgotten stories deserve to be told. If you're listening now, if you feel that pull toward the unexplained and the tragic, click subscribe. Help us reach that number. Help us keep these files open. And I want to know something else. Where are you right now? Where in the world has this story found you? Leave a comment below. Tell me your city, your country. I want to understand how far these midnight files travel. How many people out there are drawn to the darkness, searching for answers in the places others fear to look. Now, as we begin, I'm going to ask one more thing. If this story moves you, if it makes you think, if it keeps you awake tonight, wondering how something so terrible could happen during the season of peace, leave a like. We're hoping for 20 people to tell us this matters. 20 people who believe these victims deserve to be remembered. Click that button. Let me know you're there. And then settle in, because what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see Christmas forever. Christmas has always held a particular place in the American consciousness. It's more than a holiday. It's a promise. A promise that for one night, maybe 2, the world will soften, that families will gather, that old wounds will heal, at least temporarily, beneath the glow of colored lights and the warmth of shared traditions. We tell ourselves that Christmas is sacred, untouchable, a fortress against the chaos that governs the rest of the year. But every fortress has a weakness, and sometimes the greatest danger comes dressed in the costume of celebration itself. The Ortega family understood the power of Christmas. For decades, they had built their lives around this single night. December 24th wasn't just another date on the calendar. It was the center of gravity, the moment when children became parents, when parents became grandparents, when the expanding branches of the family tree all bent back toward the trunk. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, married for over 50 years, had created this tradition with intention. Every Christmas Eve, their home in Covina would fill with children and grandchildren. There would be food, laughter, music. There would be poker games that stretched past midnight. There would be the beautiful chaos of wrapping paper and excited voices, and the specific joy that comes from being surrounded by people who share your blood and your history. 25 people gathered at 1129 East Knollcrest Drive on Christmas Eve 2008. 3 generations. 5 adult children of Joseph and Alicia, their spouses, their children. The house was warm, despite the December chill outside. Someone had put on Christmas music. Someone else was dealing cards at the poker table. An 8-year-old girl named Katrina was running through the rooms with the particular energy children possess on Christmas Eve, that electric anticipation of morning and presents and magic. None of them knew that someone was coming. Someone who had spent 6 months planning this night. Someone who had purchased weapons and constructed a device designed to burn their home to ash. Someone who had ordered a Santa Claus costume in extra large, specifically sized to conceal what he would be carrying. His name was Bruce Jeffrey Pardo, and he was coming to destroy Christmas. But before we understand what happened that night, before we can comprehend the scale of the violence and the carefully constructed revenge that unfolded in that suburban home, we need to understand who Bruce Pardo was. Because this wasn't a stranger. This wasn't a random act of holiday violence by someone detached from the family. This was something far more insidious. This was intimate. This was personal. This was a man who had once been welcomed at that Christmas table, who had once been part of that family, who had once called one of the Ortega daughters his wife. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo was 45 years old in 2008. To his neighbors, to the people who passed him on the street, to the congregation at the church where he volunteered as an usher, he appeared unremarkable. He was an electrical engineer who had worked in the aerospace industry. He was quiet, polite, the kind of man who nodded hello and kept his lawn trimmed and never caused trouble. He had no criminal record, no history of violence, nothing that would signal danger. But beneath that carefully maintained exterior, something was breaking. Psychologists who later studied Pardo's case identified clear patterns. He displayed traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder combined with obsessive-compulsive tendencies. In simple terms, Pardo saw himself as exceptional, deserving of admiration and success. When reality failed to match that internal narrative, when he experienced rejection or humiliation, he couldn't process it the way most people do. He couldn't look inward, couldn't examine his own failures, couldn't accept responsibility. Instead, he looked outward. He found targets, he found people to blame. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit used a specific term for what Pardo experienced in the months leading up to Christmas 2008. They called it narcissistic injury. It's the psychological wound that occurs when a narcissistic individual is publicly humiliated, rejected, or thwarted in a way that challenges their inflated self-image. For most people, divorce is painful. It's a failure, yes, but it's a common failure. People grieve, they heal, they move forward. For someone like Pardo, divorce wasn't just painful, it was intolerable. It was an attack on his very identity. But the divorce alone doesn't explain what happened. To understand the depths of Pardo's rage, we need to go back further. We need to understand the secret he carried, the shame he had buried, the guilt he refused to acknowledge. Years before he met Sylvia Ortega, Bruce Pardo had been in a relationship with a woman named Elena Lucano. They had a son together. That son, still a toddler, was under Pardo's supervision one day when something terrible happened. The child fell into a swimming pool. By the time he was pulled out, by the time emergency services arrived, the damage was done. The boy survived, but he would never be the same. The lack of oxygen had caused severe brain damage. He would require care for the rest of his life. Bruce Pardo abandoned that child. He walked away from his son, from the boy's mother, from the responsibility of caring for someone he had failed to protect. But he didn't completely abandon him. In a move that reveals the depths of his moral bankruptcy, Pardo continued to claim the disabled child as a dependent on his tax returns. He took the financial benefit while providing no support, no care, no acknowledgement of the boy's existence. This secret, this buried shame would become critical. Because when Sylvia Ortega discovered the truth about her husband's past, when she learned about the abandoned son and the fraudulent tax claims, everything changed. Pardo married Sylvia in 2007. She was 41 years old, a member of a large, close-knit family, someone who valued honesty and integrity. The marriage lasted less than 2 years. When Sylvia learned the truth about Pardo's past, about the disabled son he had abandoned, about the lies he had told, she was horrified. She filed for dissolution in March 2008. The process was swift and brutal. For Pardo, the divorce became an obsession. He couldn't accept it, couldn't process it, couldn't move past it. In his mind, Sylvia had betrayed him. Her family had turned against him. They were the source of his humiliation, his financial loss, his wounded pride. The divorce was finalized on December 18th, 2008. 6 days before Christmas, 6 days before the massacre. The settlement destroyed Pardo's carefully constructed self-image. He owed Sylvia $10,000. He lost custody of a beloved Akita dog. He failed to retrieve a valuable wedding ring. These weren't just losses. They were symbols of defeat, each one a fresh wound to his narcissistic pride. One investigator later captured Pardo's psychology with precision. The divorce shattered him. It became his singular focus. And in the wreckage of that shattered identity, Bruce began to plot ways to get revenge. If you're still with me, if this story has its hooks in you, do me a favor. Share this video with someone. Send it to a friend who loves true crime, who understands that the darkest stories often teach us the most about human nature. Help these files reach the people who need to hear them. What separates Bruce Pardo from other men who experience divorce, who feel rage and humiliation and loss, is what came next. Because Pardo didn't just fantasize about revenge. He didn't just complain to friends or write angry letters or drink himself into oblivion. He began to plan. And he planned with a level of detail and patience that is, in its own way, terrifying. June 2008. Pardo's marriage is crumbling. The divorce proceedings have begun. And Pardo walks into a gun store and purchases his first 9mm Sig Sauer handgun. It's not his last. Over the following months, he will acquire multiple firearms, enough to ensure he won't run out of ammunition, enough to guarantee maximum damage. September 2008. Pardo places an order online for a Santa Claus costume. But this isn't a standard costume. He specifically requests an extra-large size, oversized, baggy enough to conceal weapons beneath the red fabric. Think about that for a moment. Think about the psychological calculation required to look at Santa Claus, that universal symbol of generosity and childhood wonder, and see a disguise for violence. Throughout the fall of 2008, Pardo assembles his plan with the precision of an engineer, which of course he is. He purchases high-capacity ammunition. He acquires 18 gallons of racing fuel, the kind used in high-performance engines, the kind that burns hotter and faster than regular gasoline. He converts an air compressor into a homemade incendiary device, essentially a flamethrower designed to spray fuel throughout the interior of a home. But Pardo doesn't plan to end his own life that night. This is crucial to understanding his psychology. He believes he will escape. He believes he will get away with it. He rents multiple vehicles. He plants one near his ex-wife's divorce attorney's home, filled with supplies and detailed maps of the Southwest and Mexico. He purchases a plane ticket for Christmas morning, a flight to Canada. He wraps $17,000 in cash around his legs with saran wrap and hides more in a girdle beneath his clothes. Investigators would later speculate that Pardo's plan included more than just the Ortega family. They believe he intended to target his ex-wife's divorce attorney, perhaps others who he felt had contributed to his humiliation. His mother was on that list, his own mother. She survived only because she felt unwell and decided not to attend the Christmas Eve gathering, a decision that saved her life. 6 months, that's how long Pardo spent preparing. 6 months of purchasing weapons, constructing devices, mapping escape routes, calculating every detail. This wasn't an impulsive crime of passion. This was methodical. This was terrorism, domestic terrorism, carried out with cold precision against the people he held responsible for his wounded pride. And all of it was planned for Christmas Eve, the night when the Ortega family would be together, vulnerable, unsuspecting, celebrating the holiday that meant everything to them. 11:30 p.m., December 24th, 2008. The Ortega home is alive with celebration. Joseph Ortega, 80 years old, patriarch of the family, sits at the poker table with his sons and sons-in-law. Alicia Ortega, 70, moves through the rooms, checking on grandchildren, refilling drinks, making sure everyone has what they need. This is her domain, the tradition she has nurtured for decades. Sylvia Pardo, formerly Sylvia Ortega, is there with her siblings. She's been divorced for 6 days. 6 days of relief, perhaps, or 6 days of anxiety, wondering if her ex-husband will accept the reality of their separation. She's surrounded by family tonight. She's safe. Or so she believes. Outside, a rented blue Dodge Caliber pulls up to the curb. The driver is wearing a Santa Claus costume. He's waving to neighbors, calling out Merry Christmas to anyone who happens to be watching. He pulls a large wrapped box on wheels, the kind that might contain an oversized present, something too large to carry by hand. People smile. People wave back. It's Christmas Eve. Santa is here. Bruce Pardo walks up to the front door of 1129 East Knollcrest Drive and rings the bell. Inside, 8-year-old Katrina Józefpolski hears the doorbell and runs to answer. She's excited. Who wouldn't be? It's late on Christmas Eve and there's someone dressed as Santa at the door. She pulls the door open, her face lit up with anticipation. Pardo looks down at the child, and he raises a handgun, and he shoots her in the face. Katrina's head jerks to the side at the last instant. An instinct, a reflex, something that saves her life. The bullet grazes her face instead of entering her skull. She falls backward, screaming, and Bruce Pardo steps inside. What happens next is chaos. Pure, unfiltered chaos. Pardo pulls out multiple handguns and begins firing indiscriminately into the crowd of people. There's no hesitation, no targeting specific individuals. He's simply destroying everything in front of him. People scatter. Some dive under tables. Some run for the stairs, trying to reach the second floor, trying to find a room with a lock, trying to hide. Others break for windows, throwing themselves through glass, falling into the yard below, running across lawns in their Christmas clothes, screaming for help. Pardo moves through the house methodically. He's not in a rush. He knows they can't escape. He knows exactly what he's doing. Sylvia Ortega Pardo, 43 years old, the woman he married and divorced, the woman he blames for his humiliation, goes down first. She's his primary target. Everything else is collateral. Joseph and Alicia Ortega, the elderly parents who welcomed him into their home, who treated him as family, who had no role in his divorce except to support their daughter, are both struck down. 80 and 70 years old, grandparents, the foundation of this family. Charles Ortega, 50, and his wife Sherry, 45. James Ortega, 52, and his wife Teresa, 51. Brothers and their wives, people with children of their own, people who were simply there to celebrate Christmas with extended family. Alicia Ortiz, 46, Sylvia's sister, another branch of the family tree, severed. Michael Ortiz, 17 years old, a teenager, someone with his whole life ahead of him, someone who had nothing to do with the divorce, who probably barely knew Bruce Pardo, who was guilty of nothing except being born into the wrong family. 9 people in total. 9 lives ended, and 3 others injured, including 8-year-old Katrina, who will survive but who will carry the scars, physical and psychological, for the rest of her life. The gunfire lasts minutes, maybe 5, maybe 10. It feels like eternity to the people inside. To the neighbors hearing the shots, it sounds like fireworks at first. It's Christmas Eve. People set off fireworks. But there are too many, too rapid, too sustained. Someone calls 911. If this story is affecting you, if you're feeling the weight of what happened in that house, take a moment. Leave a like on this video. Let me know you're there. Let me know these victims aren't forgotten. And then stay with me, because what happens next makes everything even worse. Pardo has emptied his weapons. The house is filled with wounded and dead. Some people have escaped into the night, but many haven't. Many are trapped inside, hiding, praying he doesn't find them. And now Pardo turns his attention to the large wrapped box he brought with him. He unwraps it carefully, revealing the converted air compressor filled with 18 gallons of racing fuel. This is his final act. He's going to burn the house down, burn the bodies, burn the evidence, make it impossible to identify who was inside. And in the confusion, in the flames and smoke, he'll slip away. He'll get into his rented car, drive to the vehicle he's planted near the attorney's home, continue his revenge tour, and then disappear into Mexico or Canada with $17,000 and a new identity. That's the plan. But plans, even carefully constructed ones, can fail in unexpected ways. Pardo begins spraying the racing fuel throughout the house. It's everywhere now, soaking into carpet and furniture, pooling on the floor, filling the air with toxic vapor. He's probably planning to ignite it with a flare gun once he's outside, once he's created enough distance between himself and the blast. But somewhere in that house, there's an open flame, a candle perhaps, part of the Christmas decorations, or a pilot light in the kitchen, or something else. The source doesn't matter. What matters is that the fuel vapor reaches that flame before Pardo can control the ignition. The explosion is immediate and catastrophic. Fire erupts throughout the house, consuming everything in its path. And Bruce Pardo, standing at the center of his own creation, is engulfed in flames. His Santa suit melts into his skin. Both arms suffer severe third-degree burns. The pain is unimaginable, and suddenly, in an instant, his carefully constructed escape plan is impossible. He can't hide these injuries, can't pretend to be an innocent bystander, can't board a plane to Canada with his arms covered in burns that clearly mark him as the perpetrator. Pardo stumbles out of the burning house and into his car. He's in shock, in agony, facing the collapse of everything he planned. And he makes a decision. The fire department arrives to find a house fully engulfed. Flames shoot from windows. The roof collapses. The heat is so intense they can't get close for nearly an hour. By the time they finally enter, by the time they begin searching for survivors and recovering bodies, the devastation is complete. Some victims were shot, some burned. Many are so badly damaged that identification will require dental records. Meanwhile, Bruce Pardo drives north to Silmar, to his brother's home. He breaks in, and at approximately 3:30 a.m. on Christmas morning, he places a gun to his head and pulls the trigger. His brother finds him hours later. The man who destroyed an entire family's Christmas, who took 9 lives in an act of calculated revenge, is dead by his own hand. Not because he planned it, not because he wanted to take that final step, but because his escape failed, because his body betrayed him, because he couldn't accept the consequences of what he'd done. When police search Pardo's possessions, they find the plane ticket, the cash taped to his legs, the maps to Mexico, the evidence of a plan that was supposed to work. And they realize that if not for the premature ignition of the fire, if not for the burns that marked him as the perpetrator, Bruce Pardo might have actually escaped, might have crossed the border, might have disappeared, and that in some ways is the most terrifying part of this entire story. Letitia Józef-Polski didn't attend the poker game that night. She was in another part of the house with her daughter Katrina when the doorbell rang. She heard the shot, heard the screams, watched as chaos erupted around her. She grabbed Katrina, whose face was bleeding, whose eye was damaged, who was in shock and pain, and somehow, in the confusion and terror, Letitia got her daughter out of the house. They ran to a neighbor's home. Letitia called 911, her voice shaking, barely able to form words. She told the operator that a man dressed as Santa Claus had just attacked her family, that her sister's ex-husband had come to their Christmas party and started shooting. In that moment, Letitia became the survivor, the witness, the one who would have to carry the memory of that night forward. When the full scope of the tragedy became clear, when the bodies were counted and identified, when Letitia understood that her parents were gone, that her brothers were gone, that her sister Sylvia was gone, that nieces and nephews were orphaned, she faced a choice. She could break under the weight of that loss, or she could find a way to continue. Letitia chose to continue, but it wasn't easy. Nothing about it was easy. 13 children lost at least one parent that night. Some lost both. Family structures that had existed for decades were suddenly destroyed. Someone had to step forward to care for the young ones, to make sure they had homes and stability and love. One nephew became the guardian of his 3 minor siblings overnight. Letitia took in her sister's youngest daughter while managing her own grief and her daughter Katrina's physical and psychological recovery. The therapy was essential. Letitia spoke candidly in the years that followed about the psychological reconstruction she underwent. She said, "I lost my identity completely. I always used to tease them that I have 5 sets of parents, everyone telling me what to do and how to do it. I can't even tell you how much I miss them." That statement captures something profound about the nature of this particular tragedy. It wasn't just 9 individuals who were lost, it was an entire family structure, the parents, the siblings, the web of relationships and support and shared history that had defined Letitia's entire life. She went from being the youngest of 5 children, the one who was looked after and teased and guided, to being one of the only adults left. The weight of that transition is almost impossible to comprehend, but Letitia found purpose in the pain. She started a blog called Letitia's Hope, where she shared stories about healing, about love, about family resilience. She became an advocate for survivors of mass violence, helping other families who had experienced similar tragedies, offering guidance and empathy and the hard-won wisdom of someone who had walked through hell and come out the other side. Katrina, the 8-year-old girl who answered the door that Christmas Eve, survived her injuries. The bullet had grazed her face, damaging her eye, leaving scars that would last a lifetime. But she was alive. And in the years following the tragedy, Katrina wrote messages of resilience. One of them said, "It'll be hard, but just have hope. Don't give up." Those words, coming from a child who had stared into the barrel of a gun, who had been the first victim of Bruce Pardo's rage, carry immense weight. They represent the choice that trauma survivors face every day, to let the violence define them or to define themselves in spite of the violence. Before we go further, I want to pause and acknowledge something. If you've made it this far, if you're still here with me in this dark story, you're part of something important. You're choosing to remember. You're choosing to witness, and that matters. So hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. Join this community of people who believe that the forgotten deserve to be found, that the silence deserve to be heard. We're building something here, and I want you to be part of it. Christmas in the Covina community was never the same after December 24th, 2008. The holiday that had always represented joy and family and tradition now carried a shadow. Parents looked at their children differently. Families wondered if they were safe in their own homes. The entire suburb, 22 miles east of Los Angeles, grappled with the unprecedented trauma of having their most sacred holiday irrevocably altered by violence. The Ortega family home on Knollcrest Drive burned to the foundation. The physical structure was destroyed, but so was the tradition it represented. For decades, that address had been the center of Christmas. It was where everyone gathered, where memories were made, where the family renewed its bonds year after year. Now it was gone, reduced to ash and rubble and crime scene tape. The question facing the survivors was simple but devastating. How do you celebrate Christmas when Christmas was the site of your greatest loss? Some families might abandon the holiday entirely, might treat December 24th as a day of mourning rather than celebration. And for the first few years, that's exactly what happened. The survivors couldn't gather without feeling the absences, couldn't open presents without thinking about the people who should have been there, couldn't hear Christmas music without remembering gunshots and screams and fire. But slowly, painfully, they began to reclaim the holiday. Not in the same way, never in the same way, but in a new form, a form that honored both the loss and the resilience. They gathered in different locations. They acknowledged the pain openly, rather than pretending everything was fine. They created new traditions while holding space for the old ones. This process of reconstruction, of rebuilding holidays and identities in the aftermath of trauma, is something that doesn't get discussed enough in true crime. We focus on the violence, on the perpetrator, on the investigation and the theories and the sensational details, but the real story, the one that lasts decades, is the story of the survivors, the people who wake up every day and choose to keep living despite carrying an unbearable weight. Letitia Józef-Polski and her daughter Katrina represent that story. So do the 13 children who lost parents. So do the extended family members who had to step forward and provide care and stability when their own worlds had collapsed. These are the people who deserve to be remembered just as much as the victims who were taken. The psychological profile of Bruce Jeffrey Pardo has been studied extensively by criminal psychologists and FBI behavioral analysts. He represents a particular type of perpetrator, one that appears more frequently in mass violence incidents than many people realize: the aggrieved narcissist. Narcissistic personality disorder, in clinical terms, involves a grandiose sense of self-importance, a need for excessive admiration, and a lack of empathy for others. Individuals with this disorder often believe they are special, unique, deserving of recognition and success. When reality fails to match this internal narrative, when they experience rejection or failure or humiliation, they respond not with self-reflection, but with rage directed outward. The term narcissistic injury refers to the psychological wound that occurs when a narcissist's inflated self-image is challenged. For most people, difficult life events like divorce or job loss are painful but manageable. We grieve, we adapt, we eventually move forward. For someone with malignant narcissism, these events are intolerable attacks on their core identity. Pardo experienced multiple narcissistic injuries in a compressed time frame: the discovery of his abandoned son, the divorce initiated by Sylvia, the financial settlement that left him owing money and losing possessions, the job loss in the aerospace industry. Each of these would have been difficult individually. Combined, they created a perfect storm of rage and humiliation. But here's what makes Pardo's case particularly instructive. He didn't respond impulsively. He didn't grab a weapon and attack his ex-wife in a moment of uncontrolled anger. Instead, he spent 6 months planning. He compartmentalized his emotions. He went to work, attended church functions, interacted with neighbors, all while methodically preparing for mass violence. This level of control, this ability to plan over an extended period while maintaining a normal facade, is characteristic of what psychologists call instrumental violence, as opposed to reactive violence. Reactive violence is hot, impulsive, driven by immediate emotion. Instrumental violence is cold, calculated, designed to achieve a specific goal. Pardo's goal was revenge, and he pursued it with engineering precision. The FBI's behavioral analysis also noted Pardo's choice of costume and timing. By dressing as Santa Claus and attacking on Christmas Eve, he wasn't just committing violence. He was weaponizing symbols. He was taking the figure that represents generosity and joy and childhood wonder and transforming it into a vehicle for terror. This choice reveals a deep desire not just to harm his targets physically, but to destroy them psychologically, to poison their memories and traditions, to ensure that even if some survived, they would carry the trauma of that night forever. And perhaps most disturbing, Pardo planned to escape. He planned to survive. He wasn't on a mission that would end in his own demise. He believed he would get away with it, would cross into Mexico or Canada, would start a new life, while his victims' families grappled with loss and confusion. His ending by his own hand wasn't part of the design. It was a failure, a desperate response to injuries that made his escape impossible. This distinction matters. It tells us that Pardo wasn't driven by despair or hopelessness. He was driven by entitlement and rage. He believed he deserved to punish the people he blamed for his humiliation. And he believed he deserved to escape the consequences. The Covina Massacre sits at the intersection of several disturbing trends in American crime. It's an act of domestic violence, an act of mass violence, and an act of holiday violence all at once. Each of these categories reveals something important about how we understand and prevent tragedy. Domestic violence, at its core, is about power and control. When someone loses control over a partner through separation or divorce, the risk of violence increases dramatically. The most dangerous time for a victim of domestic abuse is often the period immediately after leaving the relationship. Pardo's case demonstrates this pattern in its most extreme form. He couldn't accept the loss of control represented by the divorce, and he responded with lethal force. Mass violence, particularly the kind that targets families or communities, often involves a perpetrator who feels aggrieved, who believes they have been wronged by multiple people or by an institution. Pardo didn't just target Sylvia, he targeted her entire family, destroying multiple generations in a single act. This expansion of targets, this desire to cause maximum pain and destruction, is characteristic of perpetrators who see themselves as victims seeking righteous revenge. And holiday violence, while less common, carries particular psychological weight. Holidays are supposed to be safe. They're supposed to be joyful. When violence erupts during these times, it violates our fundamental assumptions about when and where we are protected. It creates a lasting association between celebration and trauma. The Covina community held meetings at Royal Oak Middle School in the days following the massacre. They brought in grief counselors. They tried to provide resources for residents who were struggling to process what had happened. But how do you counsel an entire community through the loss of innocence? How do you help people feel safe again when safety was violated in the most sacred possible context? There are no easy answers. The work of healing is slow and painful and never truly complete. But it happens, gradually, one day at a time. Through the choice to continue, to rebuild, to find meaning in the aftermath of meaninglessness. If this story has affected you, if it's made you think about violence and trauma and resilience, leave a comment below. Tell me your thoughts. Tell me how stories like this impact you. And if you know someone who would benefit from hearing this, someone who needs to understand that survival is possible even after unimaginable loss, share this video with them. Help these files reach the people who need them most. The investigation into the Covina Massacre was both straightforward and complex. The identity of the perpetrator was never in question. Leticia Józefpolski identified Bruce Pardo to the 911 operator within minutes of the attack. When police searched his brother's home and found his body, when they examined his possessions and discovered the plane ticket, the cash, the maps, the rental car information, the pattern became clear. But understanding the motive, the psychological progression that led a seemingly ordinary man to commit an act of such extraordinary violence, required deeper analysis. Investigators interviewed neighbors, co-workers, church members, anyone who had interacted with Pardo in the months leading up to the massacre. What they found was a pattern of compartmentalization. Pardo had maintained his normal facade even as he purchased weapons and constructed incendiary devices. He had smiled and nodded and played the role of the respectable citizen while planning mass destruction. This ability to compartmentalize is both frightening and instructive. It means that warning signs aren't always visible. It means that someone can be planning terrible things while appearing completely normal to those around them. And it means that the people closest to a potential perpetrator, the ones who might be able to intervene, often have no idea what's coming. Did anyone suspect what Pardo was planning? Could anyone have stopped him? These are the questions that haunt every case of planned violence. And the honest answer is usually, maybe, but probably not. Unless someone explicitly reveals their intentions or makes a specific threat, unless they leave evidence that someone else happens to discover, the planning happens in private, in the dark spaces of an individual's mind where no one else can see. Police did identify one potential warning sign in hindsight: Pardo's purchase of multiple firearms in a short period. But gun purchases alone aren't illegal, and without additional context, they don't necessarily indicate violent intent. Many people purchase multiple firearms for legitimate reasons. The challenge is distinguishing between lawful activity and preparation for violence, and our legal system is designed to err on the side of privacy and individual rights. The evidence recovered from Pardo's vehicles and his brother's home painted a picture of meticulous planning. The maps to Mexico, the staged vehicle near the divorce attorney's home, the extra ammunition, the detailed escape route, all of it suggested a level of premeditation that went far beyond a momentary lapse in judgment or an impulsive act of rage. Investigators also discovered that Pardo had withdrawn large amounts of cash in the weeks before the massacre, converting assets into a form that would be easy to transport and difficult to trace. He had researched border crossings into Mexico. He had studied the attorney's schedule and home address. His plan, had it succeeded, would have made him extraordinarily difficult to find. The fact that he failed, that his own device burned him and forced him to abandon his escape, feels almost like cosmic justice. But it's cold comfort to the families who lost loved ones. Whether Pardo escaped or ended his own life, 9 people are still gone. 13 children are still without parents. A family tradition is still destroyed. Justice in cases like this is an elusive concept. There's no trial, no opportunity for victims' families to confront the perpetrator. No chance for a jury to weigh the evidence and render a verdict. Pardo took that possibility away when he pulled the trigger in his brother's home. In doing so, he denied the survivors even the small consolation of seeing him held accountable. In the years since the Covina Massacre, there have been other cases of holiday violence, other instances where celebrations became crime scenes. But few have matched the scale or the symbolic weight of what happened on December 24, 2008. The image of Santa Claus, that universal figure of childhood joy, transformed into an instrument of terror, remains one of the most disturbing elements of modern true crime. It raises questions about symbols and safety, about how perpetrators choose their methods, not just for practical reasons, but for psychological impact, about the ways that violence can poison not just individual lives, but collective traditions and cultural touchstones. The Ortega family's Christmas Eve tradition wasn't just theirs. It was part of a larger American tradition, one that millions of families participate in every year. When that tradition was violated, when it became the setting for mass violence, it sent ripples through communities far beyond Covina. Parents everywhere looked at their own holiday gatherings differently. They wondered if they were safe. They questioned whether traditions that had felt secure for generations could actually protect them from the darkness that exists in some human hearts. And the answer, uncomfortable as it may be, is no. Traditions can't protect us. Love can't protect us. Family can't protect us. Not always. not when someone decides to break the unspoken contract that holds society together, the agreement that we will not harm each other, that we will respect certain boundaries, that some things are sacred. Bruce Pardo broke that contract. He violated those boundaries. He desecrated what was sacred. And in doing so, he created a wound that will never fully heal. But here's what he didn't destroy: the survivors' capacity to continue, their ability to find meaning and purpose in the aftermath, their determination to honor the dead by living fully, by rebuilding, by refusing to let his violence define the rest of their lives. Letitia Józef-Polski could have been destroyed by what happened. She could have retreated into grief and never emerged. Instead, she chose to become an advocate, to help others, to transform her pain into something that might prevent or alleviate the suffering of people facing similar tragedies. That choice, that act of will, is its own form of justice. It doesn't bring her family back, but it ensures that their loss wasn't meaningless, that something positive grew from the wreckage. Katrina, the child who answered the door and stared into the face of violence, could have been consumed by trauma. Instead, she chose hope. "Don't give up," she wrote. Those words, simple as they are, represent a victory over everything Bruce Pardo tried to accomplish. He wanted to destroy. She chose to build. He wanted to spread despair. She chose to encourage hope. These are the stories that matter in the long run, not the details of the violence itself, though those are important for understanding and prevention, but the stories of resilience, of reconstruction, of people who face the worst humanity has to offer and somehow find the strength to keep moving forward. If you've stayed with me through this entire investigation, through all the darkness and pain and difficult questions, I want to thank you. This isn't easy material. It's not entertainment in the traditional sense. It's a meditation on human fragility and human strength, on the capacity for both terrible evil and extraordinary resilience. If this story has resonated with you, if it's made you think or feel or question, leave a like. Let me know it mattered. And subscribe if you haven't already, because there are more files to open, more stories to tell, more forgotten victims who deserve to be remembered. We're building a community here of people who believe that bearing witness is important, that remembering is a form of resistance against the forces that would erase these stories. And now, as we reach the end of this file, I want to leave you with a final thought. Every family believes their traditions are unbreakable. Every community believes their holidays are safe. Every person believes that the worst things happen to other people in other places at other times. The Ortega family believed that too. They had celebrated Christmas Eve together for decades. It was their ritual, their sacred time, their protection against the chaos of the world. Bruce Jeffrey Pardo proved that belief was an illusion. He showed that violence doesn't respect boundaries, doesn't honor traditions, doesn't pause for holidays or family gatherings or the innocence of children. He took the symbol of Christmas itself and weaponized it, transforming Santa Claus from a figure of joy into a harbinger of death. But here's what he couldn't do. He couldn't destroy the fundamental human capacity to heal. He couldn't eliminate the love that the Ortega family shared, even if he eliminated many of the people who shared it. He couldn't prevent the survivors from choosing to continue, to rebuild, to create new traditions that honored both the loss and the resilience. The Covina Massacre was one night, one terrible night that ended 9 lives and shattered countless others. But it wasn't the end of the story. The story continues in the survivors who wake up every day and choose to live. In the children who lost parents but found guardians who loved them. In Letitia and Katrina, who transformed their trauma into advocacy and hope. In every person who heard about what happened and thought about their own families, their own traditions, their own vulnerability, and chose to love more fiercely because of it. Christmas Eve in Covina will never be what it was before 2008. That's the truth. But it continues. The holiday happens, families gather, and somewhere in that continuation, in that refusal to let violence have the final word, there's a kind of victory. Small, quiet, hard-won, but real. The file on Bruce Jeffrey Pardo is closed. He took his own life and denied justice to the families he destroyed, but the file on the Ortega family remains open. Their story continues in every survivor who honors their memory, in every act of resilience, in every moment, when someone chooses hope over despair. That's the real story, not the violence itself, but what comes after. The long, difficult work of healing. The choice to remember without being consumed. The determination to find meaning in the meaningless and purpose in the face of nihilistic destruction. If you take nothing else from this file, take this. Traditions are fragile. Safety is an illusion. But the human capacity to endure, to heal, to continue, is stronger than any act of violence. Bruce Pardo tried to destroy a family. He succeeded in taking 9 lives, but he failed to destroy what they built, what they meant to each other, what they continue to mean to everyone who remembers them. On Christmas Eve, somewhere in California, survivors gather. They light candles. They speak the names of the dead. They remember the poker games and the laughter and the warm chaos of 25 people crowded into a home filled with love. And they continue, because that's what survivors do. They carry the weight of loss and the light of memory, and they continue. The midnight file on the Covina Massacre ends here. But the story, the real story of resilience and remembrance, goes on. And as long as someone remembers, as long as someone tells this story, the victims are not forgotten. The survivors are not alone. Close the file, but keep the memory. Because in the end, that's all we have. The stories we tell, the names we speak, the choice to bear witness to both the darkness and the light. Until the next file. Until the next story that needs to be told. Until the next time we meet here, in the midnight hours, searching for truth in the shadows. Stay vigilant, stay compassionate, and remember, the files are never truly closed. They're just waiting to be opened again.